This isn't just a story. It's a scar etched deep into my soul, a chapter of my life I never thought I'd survive. The last thing I remember before the shovel handle connected with my temple was Lysander's smile, a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph in the fading twilight. As he watched me fall into the churning waters of the Snake River, he'd promised me a fortune, a new beginning, but what he delivered was a watery grave. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. Asterisk, 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 at 66. The world looks different. It's sharper, clearer, the edges of memory defined not by years, but by events. And none are etched deeper than the events of that autumn when I was 26. Full of an unearned optimism that Lysander Thorne would systematically dismantle, brick by hopeful brick. He tried to end my life then, but what he truly killed was the man I thought I was. The man I became, however, he never saw coming. My name is Kalen Reed. For 40 years, carried the ghost of that day, a phantom limb of betrayal and survival. But ghosts, like memories, eventually demand their due. This is the story of how I finally gave it to them. Back then, Seattle was a city humming with possibility. Rain-slicked streets reflecting neon signs, the air thick with the scent of coffee and ambition. I worked at a data entry firm downtown, a soulless cubicle farm where dreams came to die a slow, pixelated death. Every morning, I'd ride the bus from my cramped apartment in the University District. Watching the city wake up, feeling like an outsider peering in at a vibrant party I wasn't invited to. My days were a blur of spreadsheets and caffeine. My nights spent hunched over books, trying to teach myself coding, desperate to break free. I wanted more. I craved it with a hunger that gnawed at my bones. I saw others around me, younger even, launching startups, buying condos, living lives that felt utterly out of reach. That hunger, that yearning, was my greatest vulnerability in Lysander Thorne. Like a predator sensing weakness, found it unerringly. I met Lysander at a sparsely attended afterwards networking event hosted by a local chamber of commerce. It was one of those desperate attempts to get myself out there that usually ended with me nursing a lukewarm coffee and feeling profoundly inadequate. Lysander, however, was a different species entirely. He floated through the room, a shark in a school of minnows. He was maybe 40, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that spoke of tailoring, not off the rack. His silver hair was slicked back, his eyes a piercing blue that seemed to take in everything and give away nothing. He moved with an effortless charm, his laugh a rich, resonant sound that drew attention without demanding it. He found me standing awkwardly by the punch bowl, pretending to be engrossed in a brochure about municipal bonds. Not exactly the lifeblood of a thriving economy, are they, son? He said, his voice a smooth baritone, startling me. I fumbled, dropping the brochure. Oh, just looking. He chuckled, a genuine, disarming sound. Lysander Thorne. And you are? Kalen Reed. He extended a hand, firm and warm. Kalen, you look thoughtful. What's on your mind? I hesitated, then, emboldened by a sudden rush of something, hope. Perhaps, I blurted out. I just want more than this. It's the city. It's full of opportunity. But I feel like I'm stuck watching it from the sidelines. Lysander's blue eyes seemed to twinkle. Ah, the sidelines. A dangerous place to be, Kalen. That's where the dreams go to wither. What kind of more are you seeking? We talked for what felt like hours. He listened intently, nodding, offering insights that made my paltry ambitions feel suddenly tangible. He spoke of risk, of vision, of seizing the moment. He mentioned his own ventures, real estate development, tech startups, portfolio of diverse investments that sounded impossibly glamorous. He painted a picture of a world where drive and smarts were all you needed to succeed. And he made me feel like I had both in spades. Over the next few months, Lysander became a fixture in my life. He'd invite me to lunch at upscale restaurants I could never afford, where he'd introduce me to his associates, all sharp, successful people who treated him with an almost reverential respect. He'd talk about deals, about the art of the negotiation, about reading people. He became the mentor I'd always longed for, a guiding hand in a world that felt opaque and intimidating. He praised my intelligence, my work ethic, my uncommon eye for detail. He made me feel seen, valued, important. He made me believe I was capable of achieving things I'd only dared to whisper in the dark. "Kalen," he'd say, leaning back in his leather chair in his immaculate downtown office, a panoramic view of Puget Sound stretching behind him. "The world is full of potential. You just need to know where to dig. And I think, my young friend, you have the hands to do it." The digging came in the form of a real estate venture. Lysander started talking about a groundbreaking project, a revolutionary concept for modular, eco-friendly housing in a rapidly developing area of eastern Washington. He showed me blueprints, financial projections, even glossy renderings of the finished community. The numbers were staggering, the projected returns almost unbelievable. It was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime. Insisted. "This isn't for just anyone, Kalen," he'd explained one evening, over a single malt that tasted like liquid sunshine. "This requires trust, discretion, and a certain kind of vision. I've been watching you. You have it? I need someone I can rely on, someone intelligent and hungry, who isn't afraid to roll up their sleeves, someone with skin in the game." My heart hammered against my ribs. Skin in the game. That was the catch. I had my life savings, a paltry sum accumulated from years of scrimping and saving, a small inheritance from my grandmother. It was everything, and Lysander wanted me to invest it. He made it sound like an honor, an exclusive invitation to the ground floor of something monumental. He was putting in 10 times what I was, of course, but my small share was crucial, a symbol of my commitment. He even helped me secure a small loan against my car, explaining it was leverage, a smart financial move. He swore it would be back tenfold within 6 months. The risk gnawed at me, a cold knot in my stomach. But Lysander's confidence was infectious. His belief in me, in the project, was absolute. He had never steered me wrong. He was my friend, my mentor. He had opened my eyes to a world beyond data entry. How could I say no to the chance he was offering, the future he was laying out before me? I signed the papers, my hand trembling slightly, handing over every penny I possessed. Lysander clapped me on the shoulder, his smile warm and reassuring. "Welcome to the big leagues, Kalen. Your life is about to change." Weeks turned into a couple of months. Lysander would give me updates, always positive, always vague. "Permits are being finalized. Groundbreaking soon. We're ahead of schedule." I checked my bank account daily, seeing the dwindling balance, but clinging to the promise of the exponential growth. My old life felt even more distant, the cubicle even more suffocating. I was a future millionaire, wasn't I? Then came the call. "Kalen, big news. We need to do a site visit. Early inspection, iron out some final details. It's crucial. Just you and me. I want your insights, your fresh perspective. Think of it as your first executive field trip." My heart soared. This was it, the culmination of everything. I packed a small bag, my cheap phone, and a worn notebook, ready to absorb every detail. The drive east from Seattle was long, the landscape slowly transforming. The lush, green Pacific Northwest gave way to the arid, golden plains of eastern Washington, vast expanses of sagebrush and rolling hills under an impossibly wide sky. As we drove further, the small towns thinned out, replaced by endless stretches of highway and distant, jagged mountains. Lysander was in high spirits, recounting old business anecdotes, pointing out landmarks, playing a curated playlist of classic rock. But somewhere past Spokane, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, a subtle shift occurred. His stories grew a little darker, his jokes a touch more cutting. He started asking about my family, my background, details he'd never seemed interested in before. His questions felt less like friendly curiosity and more like an interrogation. A prickle of unease started to crawl up my spine. "Almost there," he said, his voice flat as he turned off the main highway onto a gravel road, kicking up a plume of dust. The road narrowed, winding through a desolate canyon. The cell service had vanished miles ago. The sun was now a bruised purple on the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows. I gripped the door handle, a sudden, inexplicable fear twisting in my gut. This wasn't a development site. This was nowhere. We pulled up to a deserted stretch of land overlooking a churning, dark river. The Snake, I realized. Its current looked powerful, menacing. There was nothing here. No construction, no markers, just ancient basalt cliffs and the wild, untamed river below. "Where is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lysander turned off the engine. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rush of the river and the wind whistling through the dry grass. He looked at me, and for the first time, his blue eyes were devoid of warmth, like shards of ice. "It's here, Kaylin," he said, his voice stripped bare of its earlier charm, cold and sharp. "Everything you invested. It's all here." He gestured vaguely at the desolate landscape. "Gone." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "The development. The project." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "There was no project, Kaylin. Not for you. Just a convenient way to consolidate some liquid assets." He watched my face crumple, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "All of it. Everything gone. But why?" I stammered, tears stinging my eyes. "We were partners. You were my friend." Lysander shook his head, a pitying smile playing on his lips. "Partners. Kaylin, you were a mark. An ambitious, naive boy with just enough savings to be interesting, and just desperate enough to believe anything I told you." He opened his door, stepping out into the twilight. "Friendship is a luxury I can't afford when there's money to be made." He walked around to the trunk of the car. I sat, frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, watching him. He pulled out a worn, muddy shovel. My mind raced, trying to comprehend, to make sense of the madness. But the cold, hard truth was unmistakable in his eyes. He wasn't just here to tell me I was broke. He was here to make sure I couldn't tell anyone what he'd done. "Get out," he said. "Okay?" His voice low, menacing. I stumbled out of the car, my legs weak. The air was frigid, cutting through my thin jacket. The river roared below us, a hungry sound. "Lysander, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Don't do this. I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." He took a step towards me, the shovel held loosely in his hand. "Oh, Kaylin, that's the problem. You asterisk. Could asterisk tell someone? And I can't have that. This little excursion. It was always meant to be a one-way trip." He raised the shovel. My breath hitched in my throat. I tried to back away, to run, but my feet felt glued to the earth. The last thing I saw was his smile, that same flash of pure, unadulterated triumph. As the heavy metal head connected with the side of my head, the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of pain and blackness. I felt myself falling, a dead weight, tumbling down the rocky embankment. The roar of the Snake River growing louder, consuming me. The last sensation was the shocking, icy embrace of the water, dragging me under, pulling me into the darkness. I struggled, but my limbs were heavy, useless. The current was relentless, pulling me deeper, colder. I was drowning. My lungs burned. This was it. This was how Kaylin Reed ended. The icy embrace of the Snake River was less a baptism and more an attempted burial. One moment, Lysander's triumphant smirk, the shovel connecting, the next. A chaotic tumble down jagged basalt. Then the shocking, throat-searing cold. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, and the current, merciless and powerful, immediately claimed me. It churned and pulled, a monstrous hand dragging me deeper into its frigid depths. The world was a blur of dark green and black, a suffocating nightmare where up and down ceased to exist. My head throbbed with an agonizing rhythm, a drumbeat of approaching death, and a wound at my temple screamed in protest with every desperate flail. I was drowning. My lungs burned, demanding air, but every instinct to gasp only threatened to fill them with the icy river. I thrashed, a panicked animal caught in a trap, my limbs heavy, useless against the river's immense strength. The current rolled me, tumbling me over unseen rocks, slamming my body against the riverbed. Pain flared through my ribs, my shoulder, my legs. I swallowed water, choking, coughing, the taste of mud and grim determination filling my mouth. This was it. This was how it ended. Not with a bang, but with a gurgle, lost and forgotten in the depths of a river that didn't care. But then, a flicker, a memory. My grandmother, her gnarled hands showing me how to tie a fishing knot, her voice soft but firm. Never give up, Kaylin. Not until you've tried everything. Everything. I hadn't tried everything. Not yet. A primal fear, colder than the river itself, ignited a spark of resistance. I stopped thrashing, forcing myself to remember the basics of swimming, the quiet lessons from childhood summers. Head up, kick, pull. Even with one arm screaming in protest and my head pounding, I fought. I broke the surface, gasping, only to be dragged under again. Each breath was a luxury, a victory. The current was still relentless, but I was no longer a limp rag doll. I was a broken, bleeding human being, fighting for something I hadn't even realized I still had, a future. I don't know how long I was in the water. It could have been minutes or hours. Time ceased to have meaning. All that existed was the cold, the pain, and the desperate, burning need for air. The roar of the river was a constant companion, a mocking laugh in the darkness. My vision blurred, my body growing numb. Just as I felt consciousness slipping, a violent jerk, my flailing hand had caught something. A root, a fallen branch. I gripped it with the last shred of my strength, my fingers numb, burning, refusing to let go. The current fought, trying to tear me away, but I held on, my knuckles white. My teeth gritted. Slowly, agonizingly, I dragged myself towards the bank. The riverbed was slick with algae, the rocks sharp. I crawled, my body screaming with every movement, until my head hit something solid. Earth. I lay there, half in, half out of the frigid water, coughing, spitting, my body racked with shivers, the air burning my raw lungs. The darkness was absolute, the silence after the river's roar, deafening. I was alive, but just barely, when I finally opened my eyes again. The first faint hint of dawn was painting the eastern sky in bruised purples and grays. My entire body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. Every muscle ached, every bone protested. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent pain, and when I gingerly touched my temple, my fingers came away sticky with dried blood. I was caked in mud, my clothes torn, my skin a patchwork of scrapes and bruises. I was lying on a narrow, rocky strip of shore, beneath a jagged basalt cliff face that seemed to loom over me like a silent judge. Above, the stars were fading, and the immense, indifferent sky stretched endlessly. Slowly, I pushed myself up, groaning, my vision swimming. I was alone, utterly, completely alone. The car, Lysander, all of it was gone. He'd left me for dead. The realization hit me then, a cold, hard knot in my gut, sharper than any physical pain. He hadn't just taken my money. He'd tried to take my life. My naive belief in him, my hope for a better future. Everything had been a cruel, elaborate lie. The man who had been my mentor, my friend, had looked me in the eye and tried to murder me. The betrayal was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, stealing what little breath I had. Tears welled, hot and stinging, but they didn't fall. There was no room for tears, only a hollow ache, and then a slow, simmering rage. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't about the shattered dreams. It was about the cold, calculating intent to extinguish my existence. He wanted me gone. He wanted me to cease to be a problem, a witness. He wanted me to be a ghost, but I wasn't a ghost. I was alive, and that fact alone was a monumental act of defiance. My first thought was to get away from the river. I stumbled, my legs barely holding me, my head swimming. The cliff face was too steep, too treacherous to climb in my current state. My only option was to follow the riverbank, hoping to find a trail, a road, anything. Every step was an agony. My cheap phone was gone, likely at the bottom of the snake. My wallet, too. I had nothing. No identification, no money, no way to contact anyone. I was a ghost to the world, just as Lysander intended. The sun climbed higher, relentless in the eastern Washington sky, baking the desolate landscape. The sagebrush and dry grasses stretched for miles, broken only by ancient rock formations. Thirst became a gnawing torment. My throat was raw from the river water and my desperate gasps for air. I kept moving, driven by a desperate, animalistic need for survival. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep going. Hours bled into each other. The landscape blurred. My mind drifted in and out of coherent thought, punctuated by flashes of Lysander's face, his cold eyes, his cruel laugh. The anger simmered, a low fire beneath the ashes of my despair. It kept me moving, kept me from collapsing late in the afternoon. Just as my strength was about to give out, I saw it. A faint dirt track, almost swallowed by the encroaching weeds, winding its way up from the river and disappearing over a low ridge. Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered. With renewed effort, I dragged myself onto the track, the rough gravel biting into my raw feet. I followed it, one agonizing step after another. My vision tunneling, my body screaming for rest. The track led me over the ridge and, to my immense relief, to a dilapidated, sun-bleached sign. It read, Lewiston, 40 miles, 40 miles. It might as well have been 1,000, but it was a direction. It was civilization. I kept walking, the sun dipping towards the western horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues that reminded me of the previous evening's betrayal. As dusk settled, the air grew chilly. I knew I couldn't make it to Lewiston on foot, not like this. I needed shelter. I needed water. Just as the last light faded, I saw a distant flicker. A light. It was small, barely visible, but it was there. I veered off the track, pushing through thorny bushes, stumbling over unseen roots, drawn by that beacon. It led me to a small, ramshackle cabin, nestled almost invisibly in a copse of scraggly pines. Smoke curled lazily from its crooked chimney, and the faint scent of wood smoke and something cooking wafted on the evening air. Hesitation gnawed at me. Who lived out here? Would they help? Or would they see a bloodied, mud-caked stranger and call the authorities? The thought of being questioned, of having to explain Lysander, filled me with dread. No one would believe me. A desperate, broke kid accusing a prominent businessman of attempted murder. I'd be laughed out of the precinct, or worse, committed. Lysander was powerful. He had connections. I had nothing but the cold, the hunger, the exhaustion. They overruled my fear. I shuffled towards the cabin, my hand raised to knock, but before I could, the door creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway. She was old, her face a road map of wrinkles, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes, however, were sharp, piercing, and surprisingly kind. She held a shotgun, casually, as if it were a garden hose. She looked at me, taking in my disheveled state, the blood, the fear in my eyes. Well now, she said, her voice raspy, yet not unkind. Look what the river dragged in. You look like you've tangled with a bear and lost son. I stammered, trying to find my voice. I fell into the snake. I need help. Her eyes narrowed, studying me for a long moment. Then she slowly lowered the shotgun. Come in, she said, stepping aside. You look like you're about to drop. The cabin was small, filled with the warmth of a wood stove and the comforting scent of stew. It was cluttered with books, knitted blankets, and an assortment of strange, hand-carved wooden figures. She led me to a rough-hewn table, pushing a steaming bowl of thick stew towards me. Eat, she commanded. Then we'll talk. I ate, ravenously, the simple, hearty food, the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. She watched me, silently, occasionally sipping from a mug of tea. After I'd finished, she pointed to a small cot in the corner. You can sleep there. We'll sort out your story in the morning. Don't try any funny business. I nodded, too exhausted to protest, too grateful to care. I collapsed onto the cot, the rough blanket feeling like silk against my bruised skin. Sleep claimed me instantly, a deep, dreamless oblivion. I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of crackling wood. The old woman was already up, stoking the fire. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. Feeling any better? Yes, I croaked, my throat still sore. Much. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done. She grunted. You'd have died, probably. Now, your story. And don't lie to me, boy. I've seen enough liars in my life to smell them before they open their mouths. I told her everything. Not the fabricated story of falling, but the truth about Lysander Thorne, the mentorship, the investment, the drive to the river, the shovel, the fall. I left out nothing, the words tumbling out, raw and painful. When I finished, the cabin was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. She listened, her expression unchanging, her gaze steady. When I was done, she stared into the flames for a long moment. Lysander Thorne, you say? The developer out of Seattle. My blood ran cold. You know him? She let out a dry, humorless laugh. Oh, I know, him, us type. Comes through these parts every now and then, sniffing around for land, for opportunities to screw over the local folk. Always plays the charming city slicker. Leaves a trail of broken promises and empty pockets in his wake. She fixed me with her piercing gaze. He left you for dead, and you survived. That's a powerful thing, Kaylin. A warning, maybe, or a second chance. Her name, I learned, was Alara. She was a recluse, living off the grid, fiercely independent. She patched up my wounds, gave me clean clothes, rough, oversized work shirts and canvas pants, and fed me. Over the next few days, as my body slowly began to heal, my mind began to clear. The initial shock, the despair, the fear, they started to recede, replaced by something colder, harder. Ilara didn't pry, but she watched. She saw the change in my eyes, the gradual hardening of my jaw. What are you going to do? She asked one evening as we sat on her porch, watching the stars blaze in the vast, dark sky. He thinks I'm dead, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. He left me in that river, thinking I was just another loose end, tied up. And are you? I looked at her, then back at the stars. No, I'm not. The Kaylin Reed, who had boarded Lysander's car, was dead. That naive, hopeful young man had drowned in the Snake River, but someone else had climbed out. Someone stripped bare of illusions, fueled by a deep, unwavering anger. He took everything, I continued, the words a low growl. My money, my future, my trust. And then he tried to take my life. A cold resolve settled over me, chilling and absolute. He won't get away with it. Not this time. Ilara just nodded, a slight, knowing smile on her lips. Revenge is a cold meal, Kaylin. Best served when your heart is even colder. Over the next few weeks, I stayed with Ilara. She taught me things. How to track, how to read the land, how to be invisible. She had an uncanny knowledge of local lore, of whispers and rumors that circulated through the small, forgotten communities of eastern Washington. She talked about Lysander Thorne's movements, his properties, his associates, painting a picture of a man far more ruthless and connected than I had ever imagined. His power wasn't just in Seattle. It stretched its tendrils into the forgotten corners of the state. Fueled by shady deals and quiet intimidation, I learned to work with my hands, chopping wood, mending fences, helping Ilara with her small garden. The physical labor, the quiet solitude, it forged something new within me. The soft edges of the old Kalen were slowly ground away, replaced by a steely core. I was no longer the cubicle worker dreaming of a better life. I was a survivor, and I was becoming something else entirely. One morning, Ilara handed me a worn leather satchel. Inside were a few crumpled bills, a map of eastern Washington, and a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "Go," she said. "Your face is healing. Your body is strong. You can't stay here forever." "Thank you, Ilara," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "For everything." She just smiled, a rare, genuine smile that softened her weathered features. "Stay alive, Kalen, and remember who you are and what you're fighting for." I set out on foot, walking away from the cabin, away from Ilara's quiet sanctuary, towards a future I was now determined to forge myself. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew my purpose. Lysander Thorne believed he had erased Kalen Reed. He believed he had one, but he had only created a phantom, a ghost with nothing left to lose, and a singular, burning desire for retribution. My first destination was Lewiston, Idaho, a small city across the river from Clarkston, Washington. It was far enough from Seattle, a place where I could disappear, blend in, and start to gather the information I needed. I needed to know everything about Lysander Thorne, every vulnerability, every secret, every illicit connection. He had built an empire on lies and deceit, and I was going to systematically dismantle it. As I walked, a plan began to form, crude and embryonic, but fueled by an unwavering resolve. I wasn't just going to get my money back. I was going to make him suffer, make him feel a fraction of the fear, the betrayal, the utter devastation he had inflicted on me. He took my future. I would take his. Weeks turned into months. I found odd jobs, cash work, moving from town to town, always keeping a low profile. I learned to use my invisibility to my advantage. I wasn't Kalen Reed anymore. I was a shadow, a whisper, a face that no one remembered. I frequented dive bars, truck stops, and forgotten diners, listening, always listening. People talk, especially about the powerful men who come and go, leaving their mark. The name Lysander Thorne came up more often than I expected, whispered in hushed tones, sometimes with grudging respect, sometimes with outright fear. Tales of land deals gone sour, of small businesses mysteriously failing, of people disappearing without a trace. Each story was a tiny brick in the wall of my resolve, strengthening my conviction. He wasn't just a conman. He was a predator, a spider at the center of a vast, unseen web. My physical wounds healed, but the internal ones festered, transforming into a cold, focused determination. I bought a cheap, anonymous laptop from a pawn shop using cash. In the quiet hours of the night, in dingy motel rooms, I taught myself to code, just as I had dreamed in my old life, but this time with a very different purpose. I learned about digital footprints, about data mining, about the dark corners of the internet where information could be found. I was no longer an amateur. I was becoming an architect of digital shadows, preparing to hunt a ghost who thought he had buried me. One evening, deep in the digital rabbit hole, I found it. A small, obscure online forum dedicated to victims of corporate fraud. It was a long shot, but I typed in Lysander Thorne. The results were sparse at first, mostly old news articles. Then, a single, recent post, dated just a few weeks after my own near-death experience. A user, under the handle Prayer Vigil, had posted a cryptic message. Beware the Snake River Charmer. He takes more than your money. He takes your life. Or tries to. My heart hammered. Someone else had crossed paths with Lysander Thorne, and this person, like me, knew the depths of his depravity. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a pattern, a cold, calculated string of betrayals. I leaned back, staring at the glowing screen, a chilling thought taking root. Lysander hadn't just made a mistake in letting me live. He had made a monumental error, because now he wasn't just dealing with a broken young man. He was dealing with a survivor, a ghost he thought he'd buried, who was now armed with a burning resolve, newfound skills, and the terrifying realization that he wasn't alone. And as I read the post again, an even more terrifying question formed in my mind. If Lysander had tried to kill me, if Prairie Vigil also warned of a life taken, how many others had actually died? And how many more were out there, like me, still breathing, still seeking justice? The game had just changed, and I was ready to play. The glowing screen in the dingy motel room was a window into a new kind of battlefield. Prairie Vigil. The name pulsed, a silent challenge, a beacon in the digital wilderness. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a tremor running through them. It had been months since Alara had given me that satchel, since I'd walked away from her cabin, a ghost with a burning purpose. The quiet solitude had forged me, yes, but also isolated me. This post, this single thread of shared pain, was the first real connection I'd had since Lysander Thorne tried to bury me in the Snake River. My initial message was short, cryptic, and carefully worded. I couldn't risk exposing myself or alerting Lysander if he somehow monitored these forums. Asterisk, I read your post about the Snake River Charmer. I believe I understand. Are you still seeking answers? Asterisk, I signed it. Simply, River Survivor. I hit send, click echoing in the oppressive silence of the room, and then I waited. Hours crawled by. I watched the clock, the neon sign from the bar across the street, casting a sickly green glow through the blinds. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant siren a prelude to discovery. Lysander was a phantom limb of dread, always there, a constant reminder of what he'd done and what he was capable of. The waiting gnawed at me, a cold anxiety that whispered doubts in my ear. What if it was a trap? What if Prairie Vigil was a plant, a way for Lysander to flush out survivors? But the desperation for answers, for allies, outweighed the fear. I needed to know. I had to know. Just as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, my laptop pinged. A new message. My heart leaped into my throat. Asterisk, who is this? How do you know about the Snake River? What do you understand? Asterisk, the message was terse, cautious, mirroring my own. The user's location was listed as anonymous Pacific Northwest. A fragile sense of relief washed over me. This wasn't a trap. This was someone else, just as broken, just as wary. I typed my reply, still careful, but allowing a sliver of my true story to emerge. Asterisk, he promised me a fortune, a partnership, left me for dead in the river. I survived. Asterisk, I didn't mention names, not yet. I waited again. This time, the reply came faster. Asterisk, he tried to drown my brother Merrill 2 years ago. Said it was an accident. The police believed him. No body ever found. I believe you. Tell me your story, River Survivor, and I'll tell you mine. Asterisk Merrill. Not John or David. A unique, less common name. The detail, the raw pain in the words, confirmed it. This was real. My breath caught in my throat. Lysander hadn't just tried to kill me. He'd successfully erased someone else. Merrill. A brother. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Lysander was a serial predator, and I was the one who had gotten away. Over the next few days, we exchanged encrypted messages, building a fragile bridge of trust across the digital void. Prairie Vigil's real name was Reese. She was a former investigative journalist, late 30s, living in a small town near the Idaho-Oregon border. Her brother, Merrill, had been a struggling artist, lured by Lysander's promises of investment in a remote retreat property. Lysander had taken Merrill's small inheritance. Then, when Merrill threatened to expose him, staged an accident during a late-night fishing trip on the Snake River. Reese had never believed the official story, and her relentless digging had cost her her job, her reputation, and nearly her sanity. But it had also given her a deep, personal vendetta against Lysander Thorne. We agreed to meet. Not in a city, not anywhere Lysander's omnipresent influence might reach. We chose a tiny, forgotten diner called The Last Stop in the desolate expanse of southeast Washington, near the town of Pomeroy. It was the kind of place time forgot, where the coffee was perpetually burnt, and the only sound was the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional clatter of dishes. I arrived first. A new identity carefully constructed in my mind. A long-haul trucker on a break, unshaven, wearing a worn baseball cap pulled low. I chose a booth in the corner, nursing a lukewarm coffee, watching the door. The Kalen Reed who walked into that diner was a far cry from the naive, hopeful young man Lysander had targeted. My body was leaner, harder, the product of months of physical labor and constant movement. My eyes, Ilara had told me, held a new, steely glint. The ghost of my past replaced by the cold fire of my purpose. Reese walked in 10 minutes later. She was smaller than I expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Her hair was a wild, untamed auburn, and she carried herself with a quiet intensity, a coiled spring, ready to snap. She wore practical hiking boots, faded jeans, and a thick flannel shirt. She scanned the room, her gaze sweeping over me, then doing a double take. Our eyes met. There was an instant, unspoken recognition, a shared understanding of deep trauma and unyielding resolve. She slid into the booth opposite me. River survivor, I presume. Her voice was low, raspy, but held a strength that resonated. Kalen, I corrected softly, offering her my real name for the first time outside of Ilara. And you're Reese. We talked for hours, the clatter of the diner fading into the background. We pieced together our fragmented stories, the similarities chillingly consistent. Lysander's modus operandi was a cold, calculated pattern. Identify a hungry, ambitious mark. Offer an exclusive, high-return opportunity. Extract their savings. And then, when the mark became a liability, dispose of them, preferably in a remote, watery grave. Merrill's disappearance had broken Reese, but it had also hardened her. She had been meticulously collecting every scrap of information she could find on Lysander. A one-woman crusade against a ghost. She had old newspaper clippings, obscure court documents, property records, and a mental map of his known associates and shell companies. He's a master manipulator, Reese explained, her voice tight with suppressed anger. He finds people with just enough ambition and just enough vulnerability. He builds them up, gains their trust, then tears them down. And if they become a problem, he makes them disappear. Merrill wasn't the first, Kalen. I'm convinced he wasn't the last, either. My sources hinted at a few other accidents or sudden disappearances tied to him over the years. Unsolved cases, always in remote areas. The revelation fueled the fire in my gut. Lysander wasn't just a con man. He was a serial killer, cloaked in respectability and wealth. My survival was a fluke, a miracle. And now I had a witness, an ally, someone who believed me. So, what do we do? I asked, looking at the piles of documents she'd spread across the table. Reese met my gaze, a steely glint in her eyes. We expose him. We hit him where it hurts. His money, his reputation, his power. He thinks he's untouchable. We're going to prove him wrong. Our collaboration began that day. Reese, with her journalistic instincts and network of informants, was the intelligence gatherer. She knew how to dig through public records, identify patterns, and connect seemingly unrelated dots. I, on the other hand, was the digital architect. My self-taught coding skills, honed in the lonely nights of cheap motels, became our scalpel. I built secure communication channels, created virtual identities, and began to construct a digital web that mirrored Lysander's own, but designed to ensnare him. We set up a temporary base in a small, isolated cabin Reese owned in the remote Wallowa Mountains of Oregon, a place so far off the grid it felt like another century. It was rustic, but it was safe, and it had a satellite internet connection, slow, but reliable enough for our purposes. We spent weeks immersed in Lysander's world. We mapped his corporate network, a labyrinth of shell companies registered in Delaware, Nevada, and various offshore havens. We identified his known associates, lawyers, lobbyists, local politicians, all seemingly legitimate, yet all connected by threads of questionable dealings. We cross-referenced property deeds, loan applications, and environmental impact statements. The picture that emerged was more sinister than either of us had initially imagined. Lysander Thorne wasn't just a regional fraudster. He was a player on a much larger stage, a master of exploiting legal loopholes and corrupting local officials. His current magnum opus, the one Reese had been tracking for months, was a project he called the Evergreen Initiative. Lysander was proposing a massive ecotourism and sustainable development project in a pristine, biodiverse valley in the Cascade foothills near the small, struggling community of Cedar Creek, Washington. On the surface, it sounded benevolent: luxury cabins, nature trails, a conservation center. But Reese had a gut feeling it was a smokescreen. It's too big. It's too ambitious for a man who usually operates on the fringes, Reese explained, pointing to a meticulously compiled binder of documents. And the land he's acquiring. It's a critical watershed for several small communities, including Cedar Creek. It's also adjacent to a small reservation of the Nesplum tribe. They have ancestral water rights there. My digital forensic skills went into overdrive. I began to peel back the layers of the Evergreen Initiative. I found the shell corporations, the intricate ownership structures designed to obscure the true beneficiaries. I infiltrated obscure real estate databases, cross-referenced land ownership records, and even managed to access some weakly secured local government servers. What I uncovered sent a chill down my spine. The Evergreen Initiative was a Trojan horse. Lysander wasn't interested in ecotourism. He was interested in water. The valley he was targeting sat atop a massive aquifer. His sustainable development was a thinly veiled front for acquiring crucial water rights, which he intended to sell off to large agricultural corporations and bottling companies at exorbitant prices, effectively privatizing a vital public resource. The luxury cabins were a distraction, the conservation center a PR stunt. The true prize was the control over the region's water supply. The Nesplum tribe and the residents of Cedar Creek would be devastated. Their wells would run dry, their land would become worthless, and their way of life would be irrevocably altered, all under the guise of progress and environmental stewardship. Lysander was planning to buy up distressed properties cheaply, use political influence to fast-track permits, and then slowly choke the existing communities, forcing them out. He's not just taking money anymore, I said, my voice barely a whisper, staring at the complex web of data on my screen. He's taking entire communities. He's weaponizing natural resources. Reese nodded, her face grim. He's escalating. He's getting bolder. Mero and you were small-time targets. This is a legacy play for him. He's building an empire, brick by stolen brick. The realization solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about my revenge anymore. It was about justice for Moreau, for the Nesplum, for the people of Cedar Creek, Ken, for countless others who had fallen victim to Lysander's greed. My personal vendetta had found a larger purpose. We needed to act. But how? Lysander was powerful, entrenched. He had politicians in his pocket, lawyers on retainer, and a seemingly endless supply of cash. We were two ghosts operating from the shadows, without official backing. Without resources. We start small, Reese suggested, tracing a finger across a map of the Cedar Creek area. We identify his weakest link, the point of least resistance. We disrupt. We expose a small piece of the puzzle, enough to create doubt, to slow him down. Our target became a specific land acquisition for the Evergreen Initiative. Lysander's company, Thorn Solutions, LLC, was attempting to purchase a large parcel of land from an elderly, ailing farmer named Silas Croft. Silas had refused to sell, despite intense pressure and increasingly aggressive tactics from Thorn Solutions. Reese had managed to get an anonymous tip about some of these tactics: intimidation, veiled threats, even property damage. Silas Croft is a proud, stubborn man, Reese explained. He's holding out, but he's old and tired. Lysander's people are wearing him down. They've been trying to find dirt on him, anything to force a sale. My new skills found their first real-world application. I delved into the digital records of Thorn Solutions, looking for vulnerabilities. It was a tedious, painstaking process, but eventually I found a crack. A poorly secured server belonging to a third-party consulting firm Lysander used for local community outreach. It wasn't Lysander's main vault, but it was a treasure trove of local intel, including internal memos about the Silas Croft situation. What I found was sickening. Thorn Solutions wasn't just trying to buy Silas's land. They were actively working to bankrupt him. They had discreetly bought up his outstanding debts from various local suppliers and institutions, then called them in, demanding immediate payment. They were squeezing him dry, hoping to force him into foreclosure. At which point, Lysander's shell company would swoop in and buy the land for pennies on the dollar. They were also planning a smear campaign, fabricating stories about Silas's supposed financial mismanagement and unreliability, to undermine community support and isolate him. "This is it," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "This is how we hit him first." We couldn't stop the debt collection overnight, but we could expose the smear campaign. We fabricated a leak, carefully crafting an anonymous tip to a local newspaper and a few community activists in Cedar Creek. We sent them copies of the internal memos detailing Thorn Solutions' plan to destroy Silas Croft's reputation and livelihood. We used burner phones, anonymized IP addresses, and encrypted relays, making sure our digital fingerprints were untraceable. The local newspaper, a small, independent weekly called the Cedar Creek Sentinel, published the story a few days later. It was a front-page expose detailing the ruthless tactics of Thorn Solutions against Silas Croft. The story named Lysander Thorn, connecting him to the predatory practices. It was a small ripple, but it was a ripple nonetheless. The immediate effect was palpable. The activists rallied around Silas Croft, offering support and legal aid. The sale was temporarily stalled. Lysander's carefully constructed image of a benevolent developer took a hit in the local community. It was a minor victory, but a victory nonetheless. It proved we could do it. It proved Lysander wasn't untouchable. But Lysander, Thorn, wasn't a man to tolerate even minor disruptions. A week after the Sentinel story broke, Reese and I were back in the Wallowa cabin, sifting through new data, feeling a cautious sense of triumph. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of Reese's contacts, a former colleague from her journalism days, still embedded in the state's political scene. The message was terse, urgent. Lysander Thorn just put out an unofficial bounty for information leading to the identity of river survivor and prairie vigil. He's offering serious cash. He's not happy. He knows someone is digging. My blood ran cold. He knew. He didn't know asterisk. Who asterisk? Not yet. But he knew we existed. He knew his ghost had returned. And now he was hunting us. The game had just escalated. We had provoked the beast. And the beast was now looking for us, not just to silence us, but to make an example. The small victory against Silas Croft had come at a heavy price. Lysander Thorne was coming, and this time he wouldn't use a shovel. He would use everything his empire could command. The bounty on our heads was Lysander's declaration of war. It wasn't just about silencing us. It was about sending a message. He wanted to make an example, to show anyone who dared to challenge him that he was untouchable. The Walla cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Every rustle of leaves, every distant engine sound, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Reese, ever the pragmatist, immediately intensified our security protocols. We installed motion sensors, set up tripwires, and mapped escape routes into the dense wilderness. Alara's lessons on remaining unseen, on moving through the forest like a shadow, suddenly became vital. Not just theoretical. He'll send professionals, Reese stated, her voice tight as she meticulously cleaned a rifle she kept tucked away. Not just some local thugs. He'll use people who know how to disappear problems. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the map of the Evergreen Initiative spread across the table. Fear was a cold hand gripping my gut, but beneath it, the fire of resolve burned brighter than ever. Lysander had made his move. Now it was our turn. He's vulnerable through the Evergreen Initiative, I said, pointing to Cedar Creek. It's his grand legacy. If we can expose the full scope of his water rights scam, not just the Silas Croft part, it could unravel everything. His investors, his political allies. They won't stand by him if his project becomes a public scandal of that magnitude. Reese looked at me, her eyes sharp. That's a huge undertaking, Kalen. We're talking about taking down a multi-million-dollar operation. Probably with layers of legal protection and powerful people invested in its success. We have no official standing, no resources beyond what we can scrape together. But we have the truth, I countered, tapping a finger on a complex diagram of Lysander's shell companies I'd painstakingly created. And we have his weakness, his arrogance. He thinks he's so clever, so far above everyone, that he won't expect us to hit him where it matters most, his reputation and his financial empire. Our plan began to coalesce, intricate and audacious. We wouldn't go to the authorities. They were too compromised, too slow, and Lysander had too many connections. We would bypass them entirely. Our target audience wasn't the police. It was the public, the media, and crucially, Lysander's other investors and political backers who valued their own reputations above all else. First, we needed undeniable proof. The internal memos about Silas Croft were a good start, but insufficient for the full scope of the water scheme. I had to go deeper into Lysander's digital world. His main corporate servers, I knew, would be heavily guarded. But every large network has a back door, a forgotten key, a single point of failure. I spent days, then weeks, in a blur of code, caffeine, and raw determination. Reese provided invaluable intel, employee names, former IT contractors, even casual mentions of software Lysander's company used. I studied his network like a predator studying its prey, looking for a weakness. I probed, I tested, I retreated. Lysander Thorne was good, but he wasn't infallible. His arrogance, his belief that he was beyond reproach, had made him slightly complacent. I finally found it, an outdated virtual private network VPN server, left active by a former IT consultant and forgotten. A tiny, almost invisible crack in his digital fortress. It led not to his main financial servers, but to a lesser-used project management system for the Evergreen Initiative. It wasn't the vault, but it was the blueprint. What I found there was staggering. Detailed hydrological surveys, projected water extraction rates, potential buyers for the water rights major agricultural corporations and bottling plants, and internal risk assessments. The assessments openly discussed the devastation to Cedar Creek's water table, the impact on the Nez tribe's ancestral rights, and strategies to mitigate negative public perception through community engagement, bribery, and propaganda. There were even encrypted communications discussing how to circumvent environmental regulations and silence local opposition. The evidence was damning, but it needed to be delivered, not just leaked. We needed a stage, a moment of maximum impact. Reese, with her journalistic background, knew exactly how to create that stage. We need a physical event, she explained, pacing the cabin. Something Lysander is personally invested in. Something that will draw media attention, where he will be present and vulnerable. Our target became the groundbreaking ceremony for the Evergreen Initiative. Lysander, ever the showman, had planned an elaborate event. He had invited local dignitaries, potential investors, state senators, and media from Seattle. It was to be his triumphant declaration, the formal launch of his legacy, the perfect stage for his downfall. The ceremony was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks out, at the site of the proposed conservation center in the Cedar Creek Valley. The location was remote enough to be discreet, but accessible enough for the press. Our plan was complex, requiring meticulous timing and coordination. We couldn't just dump the documents online. Lysander would bury them, discredit them, or claim they were fabricated. We needed to put them directly into the hands of credible journalists, simultaneously, and in a public forum where Lysander himself would be present to face the immediate fallout. First, needed to get into the valley. Lysander's security would be tight, especially with the bounty out. This was where Elara's lessons came back in full force. We spent days scouting the area around Cedar Creek, moving through the dense forests and rocky terrain like ghosts. I learned to identify choke points, to anticipate patrol routes, to read the land for hidden pathways. Reese, surprisingly adept at stealth, moved with a quiet efficiency that belied her intellectual demeanor. We identified a forgotten service road, overgrown and barely visible, that led directly to the back perimeter of the Evergreen Initiative site. It was lightly patrolled, mostly by outsourced security guards who were more interested in their phones than in vigilant surveillance. Our second step was setting up the technical infrastructure. I created a secure, anonymous dead drop site on the dark web, accessible only through a series of specific, time-sensitive prompts. This site would hold the complete dossier, all the internal memos, hydrological reports, land acquisition strategies, and incriminating communications. Reese then leveraged her old network. She reached out to trusted former colleagues, independent journalists she knew had the courage and integrity to pursue a difficult story. But she did so through layers of burner phones and encrypted messaging apps, giving them just enough tantalizing hints to pique their interest without revealing our identities or the full scope of the plan. She gave them the date and time of the groundbreaking, hinting that something major was about to break. The week before the ceremony, we went to ground, moving out of Reese's cabin and deeper into the wilderness. We constructed a temporary, camouflaged hideout overlooking the Cedar Creek Valley, allowing us to monitor the setup for the groundbreaking. From our vantage point, we watched as tents were erected, stages built, and security patrols increased. Lysander was preparing his coronation. The night before the ceremony, the air was thick with anticipation. We made our final preparations. I encrypted the full dossier, creating multiple redundant copies. Reese prepared a detailed press release, highlighting the key findings and explicitly naming Lysander Thorne and his shell companies, along with the specific sections of environmental law they were poised to violate. She also drafted a powerful statement from the Nez tribe, whose elders had, through Reese's quiet diplomacy, agreed to publicly condemn the project. "This is it, Kalen," Reese said, her face illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen. "No turning back now." "Good," I replied, my voice steady. "I never intended to. The morning of the groundbreaking ceremony dawned clear and crisp. A beautiful autumn day, almost mocking in its serenity. We watched from our hidden perch as limousines and SUVs began to arrive, ferrying impeccably dressed guests to the site. A small stage had been set up, draped with banners proclaiming the Evergreen Initiative, a sustainable future for Washington. Lysander Thorne himself arrived in a gleaming black sedan, stepping out with his characteristic smooth confidence, a triumphant smile plastered on his face. He shook hands, clapped backs, the picture of a visionary leader. He wore a tailored suit, his silver hair slicked back, his blue eyes scanning the crowd with an air of absolute control. My stomach churned, but it wasn't fear. It was a cold, exhilarating surge of anticipation. This was the moment. 40 years. 40 years of this ghost haunting me, of his smile replaying in my nightmares. Today, the ghost will be laid to rest. As Lysander took the stage, the crowd hushed. Microphones were adjusted, cameras flashed. He began to speak, his voice resonating with practiced charm, waxing lyrical about his commitment to the environment and economic prosperity for Cedar Creek. It was a sickening performance. This was our cue. From our hideout, I activated the pre-programmed sequence. Simultaneously, across a dozen different newsrooms in Seattle and beyond, an anonymous email landed in the inboxes of the journalists Reese had contacted. Attached were the encrypted press release, a link to the dark web dossier, and a single, chilling photograph, a blurry image of Lysander Thorne standing by his car, a shovel in his hand, overlooking the Snake River. It was a photo Reese had found in Merrill's hidden files, a picture he'd taken when Lysander first showed him the site before the betrayal. Merrill, ever the artist, had had a premonition. He'd captured the image of his future killer. Reese then made a series of rapid, untraceable calls. She alerted a local activist group in Cedar Creek, giving them the exact time and location of the press conference we were about to orchestrate at the ceremony. Lysander was mid-sentence, talking about the purity of the local water, when the first disturbance began. Not from us directly, but from the network of independent journalists and local activists Reese had cultivated. Their phones, now buzzing with the anonymous tip, began to ring. They exchanged confused glances. Then, a flurry of activity. One journalist, bolder than the rest, checked the dark web link. His eyes widened. He quickly started making calls. Whispers rippled through the media contingent simultaneously. A small group of protesters, alerted by Reese, began to approach the perimeter of the ceremony site, carrying crudely painted signs, "Our water, not your profit," and Thorne lies. They were quickly intercepted by security, but the distraction was enough. Lysander paused, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Just a minor misunderstanding," he chuckled into the microphone, trying to regain control. "Some local, misinformed individuals." But it was too late. The news was already breaking on their laptops and phones. Journalists were seeing headlines starting to pop up. Thorne Solutions accused of water privatization scheme. Evergreen Initiative, a front for corporate greed. A young reporter from a prominent Seattle investigative news outlet, her face pale, walked up to the stage. "Mr. Thorne," she interrupted, holding up her phone, "are you aware of these allegations? Reports are circulating that your Evergreen Initiative is a front to exploit the region's water resources, and that you've been intimidating local landowners like Silas Croft." Lysander's smile faltered, replaced by a mask of annoyance. "These are baseless rumors, young lady. Fictions fabricated by disgruntled ... competitors." Just then, Reese's final, devastating blow landed. A local TV news crew, one she had strong connections with, received an anonymous call, directing them to look at a live stream from the Nesplum Tribal Council. On the screen, the Nesplum elders, looking solemn and resolute, were formally announcing their immediate legal action against Thorne Solutions, citing clear violations of tribal water rights and a long history of environmental exploitation connected to Lysander Thorne. The press release, delivered through my dark web dead-drop, was already being read aloud. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, turning into a buzz. Lysander's face, usually so composed, began to tighten. His eyes darted around, searching for the source of the unraveling. He saw the journalists huddled, frantically typing on their phones. He saw the growing crowd of protesters, their voices rising. He saw his dream, his legacy, crumbling before his eyes. This is an orchestrated attack. Lysander thundered into the microphone, his voice losing its smooth veneer, a hint of desperation creeping in. A smear campaign. This project is vital for the future of Washington. But his words were drowned out. Another reporter, emboldened, shouted, "Mr. Thorne, what about the allegations of threats against Silas Croft and the missing persons associated with your previous projects, like Merrill, Reese's brother?" The mention of Merrill, of Reese, of the names he thought he had buried, hit Lysander like a physical blow. His eyes, those cold blue eyes that had watched me fall into the Snake River, snapped towards the periphery of the crowd, searching, calculating. He knew the ghosts had returned. I met his gaze then, from my hidden spot, a ghost in the trees, watching his world burn. There was no triumph in my heart, only a cold, stark satisfaction. The fear in his eyes, the dawning realization that his carefully constructed empire was collapsing, was the revenge I craved. He wasn't just losing money. He was losing control, losing his reputation, losing everything he had built on the backs of others. The final crushing blow came not from us, but from within his own ranks. A prominent state senator, a longtime ally of Lysander's, approached the stage, his face grim. "Mr. Thorne," he said, taking the microphone, his voice resonating with authority, "given the serious nature of these allegations and the immediate legal action from the Nesplum tribe, I'm afraid the state cannot offer its support for the Evergreen Initiative at this time. All permits are hereby suspended, pending a full investigation." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Lysander Thorne stood frozen, his face ashen, his mouth agape. The cameras zoomed in, capturing his stunned expression, the utter devastation in his eyes. He tried to speak, but no words came out. His world, built on lies, had imploded. His investors would flee, his political allies would distance themselves. And the full weight of the legal system, now compelled by public outcry and undeniable evidence, would descend upon him. The empire was crumbling. He looked directly at me, then, across the sea of bewildered faces and flashing cameras. Our eyes locked. In that moment, he saw not a reporter, not a politician, but the ghost he had tried to bury. He saw Kalen Reed, alive, unbroken, and relentless. The recognition in his eyes was a terrifying mixture of shock, fury, and finally, a profound, crushing fear. He knew it was me. He knew I had orchestrated his downfall. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply held his gaze, allowing the full weight of my survival, my truth, to bear down on him. The man who had once been my mentor, my friend, the architect of my near demise, was now utterly, completely destroyed. His reputation, his wealth, his legacy, all shattered, as security escorted a stunned and silent Lysander Thorne off the stage. Past the shouting reporters and glaring protesters, the scene dissolved into chaos. The groundbreaking ceremony for his legacy had become the public funeral for his lives. Reese and I retreated from our hideout, melting back into the Walla Walla wilderness. We left no trace, no footprint. Our work was done. In the days that followed, the news exploded. The Cedar Creek Sentinel's initial story, combined with the comprehensive dossier and the Nesplum tribe's lawsuit, became a national scandal. Lysander Thorne's vast network of shell companies was exposed, his history of predatory land deals and missing persons cases re-examined with fresh eyes. The authorities, finally spurred into action by overwhelming public pressure and undeniable evidence, launched a full-scale investigation. His assets were frozen, his property seized, and warrants were issued for his arrest on multiple counts of fraud, intimidation, and suspicion of murder. I never saw Lysander Thorne again. The last I heard, he was arrested trying to flee the country on a private jet, found with a false passport and a briefcase full of bearer bonds. His fall from grace was swift and absolute. He was stripped of everything he valued: his money, his power, his carefully cultivated image. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison, his name synonymous with corruption and betrayal. The Snake River charmer had finally been caught in his own current. Reese and I eventually went our separate ways. She returned to her family to slowly mend the wounds of her brother's loss, and dedicated herself to investigative journalism, using her skills to fight for other victims of corporate malfeasance. We communicated occasionally, brief, encrypted messages, a silent acknowledgement of our shared battle, an enduring bond. I didn't return to Seattle. The old Kaylin Reed was truly gone. I moved further east, deeper into the quiet, forgotten corners of the country. I built a new life, a new identity, one stripped bare of the naive ambition that had almost cost me everything. I still used my digital skills, but now for good, working anonymously to expose other injustices, to help others who, like me, had been swallowed by the system. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is silent, I still think of Lysander's smile, that flash of pure, unadulterated triumph as he watched me fall into the churning waters of the Snake River. It's a scar, deep and permanent, but it's also a reminder of what I survived, a reminder of the ghost I became. I am Kaylin Reed, and I walk among you, unseen, unheard, a phantom of justice in a world of shadows. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly what's needed. The end.